Welcome to the Ecology of the Bay Teleconference. My name is Brad Bell. I'm the environment reporter for WJLA-TV, Channel 7 in Washington, and I've been asked to come in and try to help move things along today. The purpose of what we want to do is try to expand general knowledge of the Chesapeake Bay, but also try to broaden the Bay-related curriculum in the community colleges that those of you out there watching represent. We'd also like to say that we're going to organize today's video conference in the format of a number of panels. And during those panels, you'll have an opportunity to call in and ask any questions that you'd like. You can call in while the people are talking, and when we get done with their briefings, we'll try to address all of your questions. I'd like to give the phone number now that you can call. It's 1-800-222-1292. Now, we'd like to move along to our first presenter. She's Dr. Pat Kniff. She is the project director and professor of chemistry and associate director of the Prince George's Community College Science and Technology Resource Center, which is a mouthful. But tell me, why have you done all of this work? Why is it so important to you that this information get out this way?
Well, Brad, the faculty at Prince George's Community College were interested in learning more about the Chesapeake Bay so that they could then integrate that material into their biology, chemistry, and other science courses. We surveyed faculty throughout the state of Maryland, and they too were interested in learning more about the Bay. We then submitted a proposal to the National Science Foundation and were funded for a summer 1991 workshop on the ecology of the Chesapeake Bay.
It's also not a bad place to spend much time, is it?
It was a wonderful, wonderful 6 days.
We have some pictures we'd like to show now of the Bay, and we can talk a little bit about what we're seeing here, because it is an awful pretty place, and we'd like to share them with you. Beautiful pictures were taken during a workshop this summer on the bay in and around Solomons, Maryland, which is where the Patuxent River flows into the Chesapeake Bay. What we want to talk about now is those workshops. They weren't all fun and games taking pictures of sailboats.
No, we did a lot of work out there at the workshop, and we really learned a lot about the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Project, about current research on the bay, about nutrient budgets, and about some of the fisheries management using hydroacoustics.
I believe we have some pictures of the workshop as well.
Here we are out on the Aquarius, and there's the captain from the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory getting the research vessel ready, and there's some of our workshop participants from Virginia. I see some from Pennsylvania, some from New York State out there. And we had beautiful weather while we were in Solomons, actually, for the week in June.
You were lucky it wasn't too terribly hot.
No, we had wonderful,
it's Captain Mike, I recognize him from the Aquarius.
We went out on the bay, actually, first out into relatively deep water of the bay to take some core samples, and you'll see them getting ready, actually, to go down and put some of the instrumentation overboard.
Did you find anything unusual in those? Was it pretty much what people had been expecting?
Actually, the data that they obtained, in which they then actually incorporated both by hand and on the computers, was pretty much what was anticipated for that time of year and under that type of conditions on the bay. And we did see it, there you have a Secchi disk,
Turbidity. The standard spate of tests that are done on most research vessels on the Chesapeake Bay. Can you run through those?
That's correct. We actually measured the clarity of the water, the depth of clarity of the water. We measured salinity, we measured dissolved oxygen, temperature, and the various physical data that we were interested in. Here you see a core coming up, and there you see actually Janet Barnes from the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory, who was a research associate on the research vessel with us that day with the core, and some other of the staff members from the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory. And here they're bringing up a bottom grab, and there it is.
And it's always good weather when you're doing research in the Bay. Right?
Yes,
Works
very,
out
very
that
good.
way. Well, I want to thank you very, very much for organizing all of this, and I think it's going to go a long way to help your goals. We'd also like to say that Dr. Kniff has been a great contributor to the project, but she'd be the first to tell you that she's also had some help. Dr. Joseph Mahersky of the Chesapeake Biological Lab in Solomons, Maryland, functioned as the technical director, and we'd like to hear from him now about the importance of the Bay to the region.
Incredibly important socioeconomic system, if
You're
you
up.
will, to its
Christina N.
And oftentimes we think of it in terms of living resources yield, in terms of fisheries of crabs and oysters and clams and so forth. But when you add up the total value of the bay to the region, when you look at shipping, when you look at recreation, when you look at the real estate values, if you're on shore are much higher than if you had the same parcel of land inland. When all of that is added up, the bay system contributes mega billions of dollars a year to the regional economy.
These are the people that actually were workshop participants this summer. Dr. William Shaw of Sullivan County Community College, New York, is a professor of biological and environmental sciences. Professor Jane Toscas is an associate professor at Essex Community College in Baltimore. She's been at Essex since 1973. Recently, she was charged by the college to develop educational opportunities in the environmental areas, so she's developed a new course on environmental issues. Essex also has an ongoing environmental center. Professor Norma Deal teaches a Mid-Atlantic coastal ecology course at Piedmont Virginia Community College. Her estuarine ecology course includes field work in the York River region. Dr. Barbara Benson has been at Cedar Crest College, Allentown, Pennsylvania since 1973. She is currently Associate Professor of Biology. Major course components include oceanography, marine organisms, and marine ecology. Sherman Silverman's background is not the biological sciences like the other faculty. Instead, he's a physical geographer. At Prince George's Community College, he teaches a course, Historical and Physical Geography of Maryland, which includes fieldwork in the Bay Area. We'd like to start with a question to Dr. Shaw, and that is, why is the Bay important to you and your students?
Well, Brad, it's important because the Susquehanna River drains the northwestern section of the Catskill Mountains and also a large section of southern New York State. And Sullivan County Community College is located adjacent in the adjacent watershed in the Delaware River Basin. And one of the major points that I make to my students is, as Barry Commoner has been wont to say, everything has to go somewhere. And materials that are discharged into watersheds like the Delaware or the Susquehanna, will wind up in the estuary 100 miles or 200 miles away and have a significant effect on the estuarine ecology. The Chesapeake Bay is a very unique and very large system. The bay is extremely large, has approximately 41 million acres, and is home to more than 13.6 million people, soon to be over 15 million people. Materials that can be discharged into the watershed are substances like nitrate and phosphate and others, but principally these, and are often considered nutrients that can stimulate algal growth. This kind of stimulation leads to a phenomenon often referred to as cultural eutrophication. And this eutrophication is very significant because it results in changes in the community structure of the ecosystem that often leads to the loss of species that are considered to be favorable and species that are considered to be important to the ecology of the bay. Scientists at New York State, or at the Institute of Ecosystem Studies in New York State, have demonstrated that human activity is extremely important and clearly dominates nitrate export, and that population density in the watershed is a good predictor of aquatic nitrate levels. And there are several kinds of nitrogen imports to the estuarine system, as the next slide clearly shows. One of the inputs to
There you go.
okay, well, is this slide actually indicates that control of phosphate levels. Right. This slide indicates that there are substantial population. Well, let me read.
We said we were going to try to move things along smoothly. We'll see if we can get this for you now.
Okay, the slide I wanted to show had to do with nitrate inputs to the bay, and there are essentially three nitrate inputs. The first of these is precipitation, atmospheric precipitation, principally in the formation of acid rain, hydrogen nitric acid. The second is point sources, which include largely sewage treatment plants. And these are important because they represent almost a third of the nitrogen inputs to the estuary. And it's important because these are controllable. But more importantly is that there are diffuse sources, and these represent essentially two-thirds of the input, about 67%. And what's important here is that these are not easily controllable, and that it's important because they need to be controlled because they're the major input to the estuary. A second nutrient that's extremely important is phosphorus. And phosphorus comes to the bay in a number of sources, principally from sewage treatment plants. And several studies have demonstrated that phosphorus control is an important strategy in regulating algal growth. And as the next slide demonstrates, I hope we can find this one. Okay, good.
There we go.
Okay.
Smooth as silk.
As you can see, phosphate levels decreased significantly, and as they did, so did algal growth. And with the decrease in algal growth was an increase in oxygen levels and an increase in water transparency. And these are very important to favoring the kinds of species in the estuary that we find desirable. One of the, I guess, an important point to be made here is that the Chesapeake estuary is more than just a watershed, more than just an estuary. It's a national treasure, and that it is home to not only the 15 million people to be, but also there are more than 30 million people within a 4-hour drive to the Chesapeake Bay region that consider this both a pantry in supplying a wide variety of seafood, but also a recreational playground. And the point to be emphasized is that the Chesapeake Bay is a system that can be managed to provide or to favor desirable species, and that this management will require expensive decisions and a commitment on the part of the people who live in this area.
Okay.
And just one last point. The most important thing to emphasize here is that it's imperative in motivating people, or education is imperative in motivating people to make the appropriate decisions.
Okay. Talk about the government decisions. We're going to address that in a panel coming up. We have a couple of people from the Governor Schaefer's office from Maryland. Our next guest is Professor Toscas, who could tell us a little bit about what you did in the workshop this summer. It sounds a bit like telling students what you did this summer. But,
right, what I did on my summer vacation.
Right. How are you going to put into practice what you gained from the workshop?
We've been able to incorporate some of this information into our general biology lectures and laboratories so far, and we also have the environmental issues course. Many of our students use the bay recreationally, a few of them even in some commercial senses. And so the fishery populations are of significant concern. The fisheries have shown a substantial decline since 1950. On the first slide, we see that the populations of striped bass, shad, yellow perch, and herring have all declined over the last 35 years. While some year-to-year fluctuation in any population is expected, a simultaneous and substantial decline in several populations suggests that something beyond the norm has occurred. The striped bass, or rockfish, is a semi-anadromous species. Spawning or egg-laying occurs in the spring in the upper tributaries where salinity is very low. As the young grow, they migrate into the saltier waters of the rivers and eventually enter the main bay. In the 70s, it became clear that striped bass population was in trouble. Not only did the number of adults caught by fishermen fall, but striped bass recruitment, that is the number of young surviving to adulthood, dropped drastically. The loss or degradation of upstream spawning areas appears to have been a major cause of this decline, although overfishing has also been important. Shad is an anadromous species. Whoops, we're on oysters. They're also in decline. As you can see, the harvest has declined steadily since 1880, and catches in Virginia show the same pattern. What are the causes? Overharvesting is one, habitat loss due to sedimentation and reduced levels of dissolved oxygen is another. Severe outbreaks of two oyster diseases have also played a role. The oyster decline represents not only a loss of human food, but also a significant decrease in the number of organisms available to consume the bay's algal production. It's been estimated that in 1880 there were enough oysters in the bay to filter the entire volume of water every 4 days. Today's oyster population requires almost a full year to filter that water. Okay, the shad is an anadromous species. Adults spend their lives in the ocean, returning to freshwater streams in the spring to spawn. Shad once swam as far upstream as the New York tributaries. The decline in the shad population is also related to habitat changes. Dams along the tributaries have proved to be barriers which prevent shad from reaching their spawning grounds. Dams, along with overfishing, appear to be the major factors in the decline of shad. There are several options available for managing the Chesapeake Bay as a productive fishery. One approach is to determine appropriate harvest levels for each species that can be permitted without disrupting the system, and then to regulate that fishery. The apparent success of the recent ban on the striped bass fishery demonstrates that regulation may help to restore a population. Another approach would be to examine habitat. Loss of habitat has occurred as submerged aquatic vegetation has declined, as reduced dissolved oxygen has occurred, and as excess nutrients and other pollutants due to human activities have reduced the habitat. A third approach of stocking species has been tried with striped bass. So far, this also appears to be contributing to the recovery of the striped bass population, although there are no studies available to indicate if the hatchery fish are more or less successful in the bay than the naturally bred fish.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay, thanks very much. I also take this moment to remind those of you out there watching at the 46 downlink sites that you can call in and ask any questions if you'd like clarification on what anybody's talking about or have any questions to go into it further. The number is 1-800-222-1292. Now we move along to Professor Deal. And you deal with the York River region. How do you tell us about your courses? How do you put this to work?
Well, I teach two special interest ecology courses. One of them is coastal ecology along the shore of Virginia, and the other one is estuarian ecology. Both of these are classroom lecture courses that also involve 3-day field trips for my students. My estuarian site is on the York River. The York River has 4 National Estuarian Reserve research sites along its length, and several of these are accessible to classes. My class generally goes to Taskinus Creek. It's an undisturbed tidal creek. It is relatively small in its watershed. We can examine the watershed. We can see the origin of the freshwater tidal swamps there and follow them down to the mesohaline marshes as it enters the York River. One important aspect of our field trip are the field analyses that we do and the station testing. One of the things that we test at the various stations is the nutrient load in the water column. We're looking principally for nitrogen and phosphorus. Life forms need nitrates and ammonium ions to form amino acids and proteins, and they need phosphates to form ATP molecules to use for energy. When enough of those elements are present in the bay or in any other habitat, the ecosystem thrives. But if there's too much of those materials present, it can cause devastating changes. And that's what we're seeing in the bay today. The algae, the phytoplankton in the water column of the bay and its tributaries are using those materials like fertilizers. And that results in an uncontrolled population growth. The increased numbers of algae block the incoming sunlight. When the incoming sunlight is blocked, the seagrasses, the SAVs, or submerged aquatic vegetation, can no longer receive the radiant energy they need to photosynthesize. So the grasses begin to die and disappear, and as they do, the other life forms that are dependent on those grasses for food and shelter also decline. The food chain is broken, and the ecosystem suffers. This has happened in the bay principally because of human activities in the watershed. At our summer workshop, we had opportunities to see and examine several types of large-scale nutrient monitoring techniques. And from the information that's being gathered at Solomon's and other stations, we have state-of-the-art computer graphics. You can see that demonstrated on the slide that's up presently. This shows areas of our bay system that are highly impacted with nutrient loads, moderately impacted, and less impacted for a real gradient of nutrient levels. These computer modeling techniques can also be used to predict and identify future trouble spots. And I find that sharing current information of this type with my classes helps each student realize both the immediacy of the problem and our individual and collective responsibility for change.
Okay, very good. Dr. Benson, I'd like to word the question differently, but I think it's pretty much the same. How did the workshop benefit you?
I came back really very excited, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to visit with research scientists and to actually do some of the kinds of research techniques, and I went back feeling as though I was more state-of-the-art, and I have incorporated, I'm endeavoring to incorporate in my marine biology course in the ecology segment material that is related to, as the following slide shows, how both nutrient and sediment loads seem to impact all aspects of bay ecology. Here showing fish declines for the last about 30 years, and here are a couple of slides. The first showing submerged aquatic vegetation 30 years ago and a submerged aquatic vegetation now, a dramatic decline, as we've already mentioned. And as the next slide shows, dissolved oxygen, especially the deeper levels, has shown dramatic declines from the 1960s up until the 1980s. And in my classes, I'm going to really do a case study situation where we're going to look at all of these things, and we're going to look at some of the research techniques that are shown in the next segment. Yes, here we're showing box core work, and I think that students should be exposed to these kinds of technology. They're sending down this core and bringing up sediments, which can then be carefully studied to determine what the oxygen demands are and what the nutrient fluxes are. And these kinds of studies help to determine what kinds of nutrient reductions are necessary in order to promote fish and submerged aquatic vegetation survival.
Okay, very good. Dr. Silverman here at Prince George's Community College. How does the bay affect your teaching? You're right in the watershed.
Sure. For several years, Brad, I've had a course called the Historical and Physical Geography of Maryland. And I was very aware of the cultural landscapes of the bay, the great and middling planters, rolling roads, tobacco, slaves, indentured servants. I was, of course, cognizant of the biological aspects of the bay, but I never felt that competent or comfortable teaching it or lecturing about it to my students. By participating in the Institute, I feel comfortable in dealing with that. For example, the carbon cycle is one application where you have carbon dioxide dissolved in the bay. It provides the ability of phytoplankton to evolve. They provide the sustenance for your producers, your secondary consumers, the menhaden, the anchovies, who in turn are the sustenance for your third order populations, and so forth. That to me is important. And it's all dissolved back into the atmosphere or either absorbed in the bay sediments. The increased sedimentation of the bay has been mentioned before. Barbara mentioned it with regards to the submerged aquatic vegetation. The blocking out of sunlight has also affected the ecology of the bay. I think there's one slide that I really like to show is take the bay itself and turn it around, invert it. What do you see? The main stem of the bay is a trunk, and all the tributary streams become the roots, and it's all flowing out into the ocean. So down those tributaries, down the main stem of the bay, flows the detritus of about 80% of the northeast megalopolis. I don't know, I'm not too optimistic with regards to can the bay be saved.
Well, we have a period of time now where we can respond to questions of those that are called in. And it's interesting, I'm going to start with a question of my own. I'd like to ask it to all of you because I think it makes an impression on people when they're out on the bay and doing research. Are you impressed with the bay's life, or that it is fading away, or is it coming back? How healthy did the bay seem to you folks in the research?
Well, I think it's extremely healthy, but not in the sense that I think we would like it to be. The problem is not that the bay won't support living organisms. In fact, it supports it too well, and in fact, it supports kinds of organisms that we would prefer it didn't support. And I'm not sure that I share Sherman's pessimism. I'm a little more optimistic about it. I think that we can return the bay to a condition that we would find desirable if we can control the sources of nutrients. And that will depend upon our commitment to make the difficult decisions.
Mm-hmm. Defend your pessimism.
I'm concerned with global warming and rising sea levels. If you take a look at the bay today, it's been fortified by a lot of rickrack, rocks and so forth to keep it from eroding away. If the trend of global warming is as some people are predicting it to be, the rising sea level will continue the erosion of the bay. And as far as the sediment accumulation in the bay, it seems to me that most of it's coming from the erosion of the shoreline of the bay itself, rather than from the sediment accumulation from the headwaters. I don't think I'd like to be living on Smith Island right now.
Okay. Well, I have a question from a faculty member at Alfred College in New York. The question is, how would you recommend integrating the topic of nutrient budgets into a freshman biology course?
Yeah, I'd be glad to try to answer that. Nutrient budgets can be introduced into freshman course in basic ecology sequence. It's important to understand the nutrient inputs to a bay or a lake in order to make intelligent decisions about its management. And you can introduce the numbers and then use the budget concept of predicting what the inputs are and predicting the outflows and making decisions on changing those nutrient inputs to manage the system in the direction you'd like it to go. So I think you can do it in a basic biology class in ecology.
Okay. Another question, does anyone else have any input into that matter? We'll start before we move along.
May I just make a comment related to pessimism? I came back rather optimistic about the Critical Area Commission. I hadn't been aware of that, and that to me says that regions are looking at regional problems, and they're bringing to bear on the problems the integration of scientists and government officials and citizens and so forth. And I think that's one of the things that you see in the Chesapeake Bay area that you should see as a model that would be reproduced in many other parts of the country and world.
In Maryland, the critical area has been viewed as the first step. They're also moving along toward 2020 panel has made some recommendations about controlling growth in the region. I think we're going to talk about that when we move along to the government panel. Question number 2 from a student named Vicki Oberst, I believe, at Prince George's Community College in Largo, Maryland. She says that I am interested in transferring to a 4-year institution to study marine science or marine biology. Where would you recommend?
I would say the University of Maryland has a program that I was familiar with as a result of exposure to this. I don't know the...
Is your silence indicative of the need for this sort of program? Is it not widely?
I think there are programs. I think that you have to really be looking at them, and I'm not currently sending graduate students, and there aren't undergraduate programs, essentially. There
Old
may be
Dominion in Norfolk has a
maybe 2 or 3 for undergraduates, but there are many graduate programs with emphasis in marine biology, and you would just look for the coastal universities that have access.
Let me make a plug for Virginia. Besides ODU, the College of William and Mary also has a marine biology program. It would depend a lot, I think, on the variables that you can't state in a simple question like that, what particular area she's interested in and that sort of thing. It's like recommending a restaurant.
Yeah. Well, how would you talk then about the quality of education in this area? Does it need to improve? Is it coming along? What would you recommend to the folks watching out there now as they're, beyond this video conference, their first step to really expand the knowledge? This is someone who's looking for more knowledge, more education.
From the students who are interested?
Both, for the benefit of the students, from the perspective of those teaching.
I think I always found that I felt that I learned much more from a presentation in which there was a specific example, so that any type of particularly ecological information that was presented in a general form was very abstract. But when you could pin it down to a specific example, particularly one that I was familiar with, it hit home and it made sense. And it was simply much better. And I think the more of that can be incorporated into coursework, I think you've got a much better chance of interesting the students and gaining their attention.
Okay. What we're talking about here with Vicki, I think, was an individual who's looking to do a little bit for the Bay as well. And I'd like to thank you all very much for speaking with us and participating in the workshop. And we're talking about individuals. We want to talk to Joe Merhersky again about the same questions. We asked him, how can individuals do their part to help the Chesapeake Bay? And here's what he had to say.
There are many things you do. You shouldn't use excess fertilizer on your lawn. You should worry about the chemicals that are in your kitchen cabinets. You just don't dump things down the drain. You don't dump things into the gutters.
Okay. I said we're going to be moving around. You caught me in the act. Well, we talked about individual advocacy, and I'd like to introduce our next couple of people. Fran Flanagan is here. She's the Executive Director of the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and Christina Pompa is the Grassroots Project Coordinator for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Now, start with you, Fran. How are you?
Nice to be here. Thank you.
How can individuals reuse the resources of your group, the Alliance for the Bay?
Well, we have several things that we offer to individuals, and I think the thing that we should talk about today that's most relevant to this audience is our 800 phone number, which we call CRIS, C-R-I-S, and we encourage both teachers and students to use the phone number as a way to gain access to some of the many, many resources that are available for schools from elementary through college. We also try to service citizens who call. We have a lot of information materials, and we have some volunteer opportunities.
Okay. Did you want to explain CRIS to us a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm told that we can actually use our telephone here to try to make a phone call. So let's see what happens when we do that.
Okay.
CRIS is an 800 phone number, and anybody in the Bay Area can call. You simply dial 1-800-662-CRIS.
Okay, there's the number on the screen. I'll get my paper out of the way so you can see it. There we go.
And I believe that on the screen they're going to try to show us, if I'm not mistaken, how this works. While we're waiting for something there to come up, what you get when you call this phone number is, first of all, an interactive computer. the computer will give you several messages with regard to options that you have. And if you are a student and you want general information, it'll tell you to press a certain number. If we have a live person, actually, which I think is an advantage to this system. I'll hang the phone back up. And if you want to speak with our CRIS coordinator, her name is Carol Barth, and she, when she is in the office, is more than willing to try to help people respond to specific questions. I guess my advice to anyone listening to this show would be that if you want to get information about the Bay, try to form your question in a way that we are able to help. We get a lot of students who call and say, send me some information about the Chesapeake Bay. If we get that kind of general question, we're likely to send you something that looks like this, and I'll hold this up, maybe the camera can get it. This is the current annual report from the Chesapeake Bay program, and it provides what I think is a really useful overview of Chesapeake Bay work going on in Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. If people want information about our organization, they're likely to get a publication like this in the mail. This is Bay Journal, which we are willing to send out free of charge every month. And we have also a series of fact sheets. I'm going to hold these up too because I think they're good for people to see. We have these on many of the rivers of the Bay, including some of the tributaries in Pennsylvania. Now, if we have a student who really wants to get into specifics and, for example, would like to do a research project on oysters, let's say, we can direct them to researchers and to state agencies that will provide detailed information and help them really get into a nice project. All of that by calling this 800 phone number.
Likewise, you'll help those that are teaching the professors
Yes.
develop curriculum, that sort of thing?
Well, we're not in the curriculum business, but we can point them in the right direction, and we can let them know about resources that we're aware of, a curricula that we're aware of, and so forth.
Okay. Christina Pompa of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Bay Foundation has earned a reputation for, I want to say, starting from the bottom. There's a lot of work with kids, young kids, and getting grassroots going. How have you done that? Tell me a little bit about the Bay Foundation's grassroots efforts and organization.
Basically, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is a nonprofit organization. We're the largest conservation organization working to save Chesapeake Bay. We do have a large grassroots component. We deal with 3 issues, mainly empowering citizens to become involved in the legislative process, also different volunteer activities, hands-on activities, people can actually get out and get dirty. And we also produce a lot of information that helps people become more environmentally sensitive individuals.
Mm-hmm. One broad question, I suppose, for both of you. Can individuals do it in this case? Does it work? You both deal with individuals hoping for an aggregate
Brad, I think
difference,
that's really the essential bottom line. I think individuals have to do it. I think government has made a remarkable effort in the past decade to do the kinds of things that can be done through regulation, through increased budgets and so forth. But I think that as we look forward in the decade of the 90s and then into the next century, we're really looking at a critical need to change individual behavior. We've got to all begin to realize that we're connected to these problems and that we are ultimately the solution. I think that's absolutely critical, and recent surveys have indicated that that's the area where we have not yet made a dent. We have not yet persuaded people that their tiny little bit added up over the 13 million people that live in this watershed will in fact make the difference.
I think that Fran has made an important point there, mentioning that there are 13 million people in the watershed. I think it's very easy for someone to point a finger and say, I think it's the farmers that are the problem, I think it's the watermen taking too much out of the bay, I think that it's sewage treatment plants, I think it's this, I think it's that. I think it really comes down to the fact that yes, there are 13 million of us in the watershed, and we do impact the bay every time we get in our automobile to drive somewhere, every time we pick up a plastic utensil and then throw it in the trash. If we start recycling, if we cut down on our amount of packaging, if we start doing things a little bit differently and thinking about our impact, we can make a difference and we can save Chesapeake Bay.
Okay. I'd like to take this moment to say that this is the time when you can call in and ask questions if you'd like. The number again is 1-800-222-1292. I have one here from a faculty member at Garrett Community College, and it's to Fran. Can classes at colleges and universities become involved in the citizen monitoring program? We didn't mention the citizen monitoring program first, so let's start by explaining that.
Okay, I brought just a little flyer. I didn't bring a lot of information about it, but this is a project that we've been running for about 6 years now, and other groups in addition to the Alliance are certainly involved in citizen monitoring. What we are doing is encouraging trained volunteers to go out using equipment that we provide to them to collect weekly water quality samples. We are providing then this information to government agencies at the county and state level who are using it to assess whether our rivers are in fact getting better or getting worse. The answer to the question is yes. I think the only difficulty that I see with a college class or a class of any kind, no matter what age the students are, is that they're not going to be able to do this project over a long-term basis, and we believe that you've got to collect data repeatedly over a long period of time before you can assess a true trend in the river. I do think, however, though, that it's a wonderful demonstration for students to get a sense of A, how difficult it is to understand what's going on in the water, B, a little bit of a sense of what the science is all about, and C, some feeling for the long-term nature of these problems that are dealing with. So I would encourage teachers who have classes who would like to get involved in this to give us a call. We'll try to help.
Okay. Christina, I know you folks have a project that perhaps lends itself more to a one-time shot with a group, and that's the storm drain painting. Explain that a little bit.
Okay, we have a project called Storm Drain Stenciling where volunteers go out and they stencil stormwater inlets with the message, Chesapeake Bay Drainage, Don't Dump. This is a really important project because in Maryland, parts of Virginia, Pennsylvania, anything that enters a storm drain doesn't receive any kind of treatment. It goes directly into a stream, river, any kind of body of water, and then it's going on to the Chesapeake Bay. This is one of those before-the-pipe projects, how to clean up stormwater before it does get polluted. Volunteers go out, they stencil the storm drains. It's active learning for the people that participate in the project, and it's passive learning for people that then see the storm drains later on, whether it be motorists or joggers, and it has a lasting effect.
Okay. We have a question from Carol Swindell at I can't read it, at Community College in Locust Grove, Virginia. And the question is, and I know you both have opinions about this because you've lobbied to the matter, if a spill similar to the Exxon Valdez incident occurred in the Chesapeake Bay, what mechanisms are in place to ensure an effective and immediate response?
I'm going to give that one to Fran.
I think that's a tough question. Since the massive oil spill that occurred in Alaska, I know that our state agencies have really reassessed their own capabilities to deal with a spill of that nature. Heavens only hopes that we would never have anything like that in the Chesapeake Bay because I think it would be very devastating. But the ability of agencies to cope with that kind of thing has been improved, and in fact there is some effort afoot right now to train volunteers to be helpful in that kind of instance. I do think, however, that prevention's got to be the major strategy for the Chesapeake Bay so that we don't ever have to be concerned with cleaning up that kind of a catastrophe.
Let me go further. As a reporter, I've asked the question to people in government and whatnot, and the response that I've gotten to that is that we probably in the Chesapeake Bay could never have a spill like Exxon Valdez for two reasons. One, we don't have super tankers, and two, we're not transporting crude. Can you leave it at that?
No, no, I think that's inadequate. I mean, that's probably true. But there are other kinds of substances being transported over the Chesapeake Bay, other oil products and other kinds of substances that could be extremely hazardous. We're also talking about a confined area, not such great flushing, particularly in the upper part of the bay, so that if we had a spill of even, a small magnitude in relation to Exxon Valdez, it could be very catastrophic. Which is why I think prevention has got to be the name of the game. But we've also got to make sure that we do have the capability to clean up. And in that regard, I think that we've got to depend on the private sector as well as government. I mean, I think some of the burden for taking care of a catastrophe has got to fall on those that cause the problem.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I think we're going to be juggling around a little bit here, but I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you that copies of this video conference will be available on tape. It's $20 from the Prince George's Community College, and we're going to tell you how to go about getting it. If we could back up I'd like to read that a little bit because it's important to the people. Thank you. The set of 80 slides that were developed during the summer 1991 NSF-supported workshop held at the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory in Solomons is available on videotape. And some of those have been seen during this video conference and some will be seen during the program's close. And as I just said, the tape of this video conference is also available for $20 from Prince George's Community College, and there we have it on the screen now. For further information, you can go to the community college at the address that you now see on the screen. Okay, there, we're all set up. Now I'd like to introduce Professor Paul Billeter. He is, excuse me here, he's with Charles County Community College. You've been there since 1974, and you're actively involved with the students in field activities in the Bay region. He teaches a marine biology course with laboratory and lecture, and a tropical marine biology course at CCC. Shirley Cavalier is a high school biology teacher from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. She's developed a Bay teaching program for high school students. Shirley was cited by Countryside magazine in 1990 as one of 20 individuals in the U.S. who have made a difference for the environment. She also received the Isaac Walton Award for the Chesapeake Independent Research Students class, which she teaches at Gettysburg High School. Shirley and her class were featured in National Public Television's Conserving America series. The tape of her activities has been provided us courtesy of WQED. It's quite a mouthful. We're going to start with a question to Professor Billeter, which is, show us how faculties can use the field experience in coursework.
Okay. In a recent article in the Washington Times, Dr. Lynn Margulis from the University of Massachusetts was recognized as being one of the top biology teachers, college teachers in the country, and she said that the best learning takes place in the field, and I have to agree with her on that. And I've put together a series of slides for today that shows many places around the Chesapeake Bay where I've taken my students and where other faculty can take theirs, and I'd like to show those slides. The Chalk Point Power Plant is located in Prince George's County in central Maryland, not too far from Washington, D.C. It's a PEPCO power plant, a fossil fuel power plant, burning both coal and oil. And they have a very strong commitment to education and environmental issues at PEPCO. And you can take your classes to the PEPCO power plant, go inside for a tour of the plant, and outside they have a nature trail in association with the Capitol Parks Commission, and you can take your students on this nature trail. Here's a 17-foot observation tower that overlooks Swanson Creek in the off the Patuxent River, and right on there on the grounds of this power plant at Aquasco, Maryland, is PEPCO's striped bass raising facility. As part of their licensing, PEPCO has agreed to raise striped bass, and they have really, I think, the most successful striped bass hatchery in the state of Maryland. They raise over 300,000 striped bass and put them back into the Patuxent River system each year. Here you see the inside of the mariculture facility there. Here are some people size sorting the striped bass. They take the bigger fish out of the tank so that they don't eat the smaller ones. And the finished product here is released in the late fall in conjunction with the Department of Natural Resources. Here's a fish tagged with a spaghetti tag. A few fish are tagged that way. All the rest of them are tagged with a metal tag in their cheek that's bar-coded and can be detected by a metal detector by field scientists. Right down the river from the PEPCO plant on the same day, you can visit the Benedict Estrin Research Laboratory at Benedict, Maryland. This laboratory is associated with the Academy of Natural Sciences, formerly the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia. It is an operating and functioning research laboratory, but they do have an education program. The RV Joseph Leidy is their research vessel, and they will take students out on this. It can transport maybe maximally 13 students. But you certainly can take more than that and have the class split up with 13 students in the marshes and field nearby and 13 out on the Patuxent River. Here we see the ever-present ospreys that have made such a great comeback. This is on the Patuxent River. And as I said, well, here's a picture from the boat. This is a collection of fish one summer with a group of high school students in a gifted and talented workshop. And you can see the river. This is maybe about 10 years old, but the river is quite a productive place in terms of fish. You can do standard water sampling. Physical and chemical sampling is available. They will supply some of the equipment for that. And as I said, you can take half your group into the marsh and do seining and study the marshes along the shores of the Patuxent River while the other half is out on the boat, and then switch. So you can take a class of maybe 26 down there. And The Virginia Institute of Marine Science Field Station in Wachapreague, Virginia, is located on the southern Delmarva Peninsula. It's actually on the Atlantic coast rather than being on the Chesapeake Bay. It's a shellfish research laboratory, but it does have facilities to handle small classes, particularly of college students who wish to visit. They have a dorm that holds 28 students in what they call semi-private rooms. You do your own cooking there. You can save some money that way. And they have two large 70 horsepower Boston Whaler type vessels that are available for your use at about $50 a day each. This area has broad areas of salt marshes, and again, some students can be working in the marsh doing marsh surveys and so forth when others are out in the boat. So you can take a larger class than the two boats can handle at one time. Just up the coast from Wachapreague is the Marine Science Consortium at Wallops Island. Wallops Island, of course, is where NASA has a large outpost. And the Marine Science Consortium is housed in an old military base, and it has a fully functioning cafeteria and is an institution that is entirely geared for education, for teaching. If you go there, you get free access to the National Wildlife Refuge at Chincoteague and the National Seashore at Assateague. Take your students there to see the wild ponies. They have these two oyster monitors of about 40 feet each, 38 feet each, that can shallow draft vessels that can go into the shallow waters to do sampling in the marshes, and their 55-foot research vessel, the RV Delaware Bay, can take your class out to do trawling, plankton tows. Here's a student triangulating his position on a course. These students are from Millersville College in Pennsylvania, collecting plankton and using a refractometer to measure salinity. So they have the full range of instrumentation, wet chemistry materials available for your use if you call them ahead and plan for your field trip. Hampton University in the Southern Bay is old and well-known university. It is and has a small oceanography department, and you can take your students if you want to go down into the lower part of the bay. Their oceanography department also has a vessel, the RV Pirates Cove, about 38-foot-long vessel, available for your student use. In the lower bay, you can find a lot of more interesting organisms or different sorts of organisms that you don't find up in the Patuxent River and so forth, sulfur sponges, redbeard sponges, and so forth. Wet chemistry can be done there. They will make their labs available to you if you go on a weekend. And finally, the University of Delaware in Lewis, Delaware, the College of Marine Science, this is their logo, located on Cape Henlopen, is an excellent place to take students. Broad marshes, and currently a vessel available for your use to take your students out. And here you can catch sharks and skates and rays and so forth, and a lot of sort of things that will certainly excite your students. This is a picture of an oil skimmer that is available. One of the questions I was asked earlier, what can happen if there's an oil spill? Well, there are some boats available to go out and deal with it immediately. This is an oil skimmer that is docked up in Lewis, Delaware.
And that's 3 people. Yes. Let me apologize right now for an unforeseen weakness in the system that we've worked out here. We're getting the questions a little bit after the panels have moved along. So let me say right now that our next panel will be folks from Maryland State Government. You can deal with governmental issues, and Shirley and Paul will be here for another couple of minutes. And I'd like to move along to Shirley now. And have you used fieldwork? How have you won all these awards and gotten all this great attention?
Our student group at Gettysburg High School has been very fortunate in receiving recognition for their conservation effort. That is not the primary purpose that this group works. The primary purpose that our group works for is to become more knowledgeable about the local environmental issues relating to water quality so that they can be better informed. And once students are better informed themselves, then they want to take action, and they want to go out and tell other people. They want to put programs on for elementary students, for high school students. We regularly put programs on at the Pennsylvania Science Teachers Association convention. So the recognition we've received is a wonderful plus to doing what the students feel they should be doing, and that is being concerned citizens.
Okay. What about field work? We've talked a little bit about field work. How important is that to you?
I feel field work is extremely important, and it's something that every school district, college, public, private, should be supporting in their programs, science and any of their subject areas. Through field work, you have the, quote, hands-on experience. You have the active participation that really reinforces some of the classical academic information that you want your students to take home. You know yourself, if you do something with the knowledge that you've gained, it cements it, and it makes it yours to use for the way you want to use it.
Okay. I hate to mention it, but times are tough these days financially. Do the trips need to be of great distance to the areas that you've spoken of, or can they? Are there ways that you can incorporate field work right at home, whether you're up Western Maryland or New York State or whatnot?
Certainly there are many opportunities to take field trips around the Bay at several different levels of cost. I am somewhat remiss in not mentioning the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. The representative was here before. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation has done a fantastic job in bringing youngsters in primary school and high school to the Bay. My daughter has taken part in one of their programs and thinks it was the best thing she ever did practically. But if you ask students to contribute some money to it, some $5 or $10, you'll have enough money to go out on a research vessel if you have 30 students or 24 students. These boats range from about $40 to $80 an hour, and some of them are subsidized by the individual institution's education program. So there are ways to get students into the field and even to go out on research vessels. And if you can't afford that, you can certainly, the Chesapeake Bay watershed is a huge place, and there are streams and tributaries where you can take your students to do work.
Forgive me, I also see that the first question is from Prince George's County High School teacher to Shirley. Is it practical for high school trips to be organized that way? The question is, how can teachers provide field experience for students when there are tight fiscal constraints in the state?
I understand that, that frame of mind. It is possible to do field trips on a shoestring budget. I have just completed for an ecology class a field trip to Chesapeake, and I lead the trip myself. We camp in tents, and we do our cooking on Coleman stoves, and we also do our own programming in the field, connecting up with the National Seashore people. Now, I have done that for as many as about 32 students and chaperones. So it can be done, and it makes it a very pleasant experience.
Okay, well, we also provided a perfect lead-in for what we'd like to share with you next, and that is we have an edited segment of a program from WQED Pittsburgh about your program and the Chesapeake Bay Kids. We'll take a look at it now.
The Chesapeake Bay, America's greatest estuary. With over 8,000 miles of shoreline, it is a mecca for sailors and a catch basin for pollutants. In the late 19th century, thousands of wind-powered vessels like this skipjack would harvest up to 15 million bushels of oysters per year. Now, the oyster harvests, like the skipjack fleet itself, have dwindled. Captain Ed Farley's skipjack is the Stanley Norman, and today it is a floating classroom for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. But these are no ordinary students. They are the Chesapeake Bay kids from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, led by their biology teacher, Shirley Cavalier.
The other organisms.
Every piece of mail I was getting across my desk said Chesapeake Bay, Chesapeake Bay, and the Chesapeake Bay is in trouble, and we've all got to do something about it.
Over 75% of all marine pollution comes from the land, and fully 1/2 of the bay's fresh water comes from the Susquehanna River, which flows through some of the richest farmland in America. But what's good for these Pennsylvania farms is bad for the bay. Back from their trip, Shirley Cavalier students continue to learn about the relationship between their home waters here in Adams County and the health of the Chesapeake.
Listen up, you guys. Let's do oxygen, carbon dioxide. Let's do pH, alkalinity. We'll do some free acidity. Every bit of water in Adams County ultimately ends up in the Chesapeake Bay. And so our Chesapeake students have begun to learn that their own cleanup begins right here in Adams County.
People may be polluting thousands of miles away and not even knowing it.
No matter where you live, there's always going to be some kind of water system around you. And that's going to affect another river or another creek, which is going to affect some larger body of water.
John Hess is one of a handful of farmers who have adopted conservation practices to help the bay. Shirley Cavalier and the Bay Kids are here to find out more. A milking cow produces over 100 pounds of waste in a single day, and there are nearly 10,000 milking cows in Adams County alone. The enormity of the problem is clear. John Hess shows the students his new manure storage system. Designed to minimize seepage and preserve nutrients, it allows him to manage this natural fertilizer more efficiently. By using this system in conjunction with his terraced fields, John Hess is not only helping to save the bay, he is saving money. The Bay Kids show people that by simply taking the time to read a label, anyone can help improve water quality.
The first one here is probably the best.
Mrs. Cavalier really opened my eyes to the problems of the Chesapeake, and then in turn, I'm going to educate people so they can tell their friends and it'll be passed on.
The oil from one engine of a car, which is about 4 to 6 quarts, can make an 8-acre oil slick. See how it goes down the bottom, but it floats back up to the top, and it just sits there. It doesn't do anything, and it sticks. It doesn't come off, so you can't wash it off. It stays on there. To avoid accidents like this, like in just streams and waterways, in Pennsylvania, it is illegal to dispose of oil in any other way than to recycle it.
As you can see now, I'm pouring kitty litter into this can, okay? Now, tonight, I'm going to show you how to dispose of things like bug spray. I gave a presentation at the State Science Convention, and it was to teachers, and I was very nervous because I thought, you know, no way they're going to listen to us. And I was really surprised at the reaction we got from them. They were so attentive, and they wanted to know more. And I've now come to realize that we're not just a bunch of kids. We really can make a difference.
You know, my grandfather and my father would say to me when I was younger, they'd say, you know, oh, look out there. I remember when this was all farmland, you know, as far as the eye can see. Or my dad would say, this was a, you know, great place to hunt. It's a great place for wildlife until they put that housing development in there. So the Chesapeake Bay is important to me because when I grow up and I get older, I don't want to have to go. You know, the Chesapeake Bay, oh, I can remember when people used to fish there. Or I can remember when, you know, it used to be a great place to go down and take a boat ride or something.
We all live downstream, as the slogan says.
Because of Shirley Cavalier and her students and the efforts of many others, including the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, this great natural resource just might be saved.
The last shot is of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation skipjack, the Stanley Norman, which is another field trip that's available if you contact the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. That's a 90-year-old skipjack that's operating out of the Annapolis area with an education program where the kids can do the sort of research programs. Now, I remarked that you can see the real spark in the kids' eyes when you take them out in the field like that. And you responded with some tips. And you said the teachers needn't be shy about doing the field trips themselves.
No, I think that the teachers with a few courses like PAT and the Prince George's Community College have sponsored can really get the fiber that they have to sponsor the trips themselves and to do their own programming. And I think that that is a real positive force that we need to begin moving on.
Mm-hmm. A simple tip, and I know it seems simple, but you were talking about where the kids stay if you're taking an extended field trip. And you said that you can save some money?
Well, you can save a lot of money camping in tents under that broad black sky and doing astronomy at night and listening to the owls hoot, and it has you acquire a real appreciation for nature, and I think that's one of the basic foundations that we want to instill in these children today.
Okay. Now, we have a question for Paul from a faculty member at Westmoreland College in Pennsylvania, and the question is, how can we get copies of Paul Billiter's field activities? So I guess the question is, what is a good resource? Where can you really go to find out about all of these things if you missed them when they flew by here?
Well, I have a handout that I put together for this summer's workshop that will explain most of these places, costs, telephone numbers, addresses, who to contact, and so forth. And you can get that from me by writing to me at my college in Charles County, or you can get them from Pat at Prince George's College. I also have these field trips that I put together. These are self-directed field trips, handouts essentially, where students take themselves to the Calvert Marine Museum, the Baltimore Aquarium, and the Smithsonian and do work there. And if anyone wants a copy of those, I'll be glad to send them to them, just have them contact me at Charles County Community College.
That's an interesting idea, that the self-guided field trips. They needn't wait to have it organized.
Right, they go by themselves. And these museums and the aquarium certainly are fantastic educational resources that we have in this state, and the Smithsonian also, although the Hall of the Sea has been closed for a while and I've had to eliminate that field trip until they open it up again, are fantastic resources that should be taken advantage of by teachers.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. We appreciate it. I think that, I know from my personal experience, I've seen the field work do remarkable good with the kids. So we'd like to say thank you, and we'd like to hear from Dr. Mahersky again, and this time it's about some of his broader concerns about the Bay and the Bay region.
Population numbers. Or we're not going to have the Bay. We're not going to have coastal system in the United States. We're not going to have a worthwhile planet. That's what it amounts to.
Well, as promised, we've moved along to the government section, our government panel for the day, and on my right is Thomas Burke. He's the director of Chesapeake Bay Communications Office of the Governor of Maryland, and on my left is David Carroll. He's the Chesapeake Bay Coordinator, the Office of the Governor. Now, I want to start. The government has been sort of in a hot seat, and I think I want to bring up the subject that was talked about earlier, and that's development. And I suppose I'll start with you, David. The 2020 panel, we've heard an awful lot about it. Explain a little bit what your goal is with the legislation.
Sure. Back in 1987, when we signed the New Bay Agreement, the governors of Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Maryland, we recognized early on that growth was going to be the real challenge in the future to whether or not we were going to restore and keep the restoration effort going. That panel directed the states to set up their own mechanisms to look at how to manage growth, and the governor appointed almost 2 years ago a panel in Maryland that made specific recommendations to the legislature last year about how to manage future growth. It is actually a pro-growth bill and a pro-environment bill. The legislature decided not to act on it last year. They have held it over for what we call summer study, and they are in the process of doing that now. And we anticipate a piece of legislation in the 92 session. Essentially what it says, it outlined a number of principles that if we're going to manage future growth, we're going to have to follow, both for fiscal reasons and environmental reasons. One was to concentrate growth, future growth, in areas that are already serviced by things like roads and schools and fire departments and water and sewer, rather than spreading out all over the landscape. The second vision, if you will, was in fact to preserve sensitive areas, our floodplains, endangered species, forests, comprehensively across the state. Also to preserve farm communities that we see dwindling. Farming in Maryland is a $2 billion a year business. Those communities need help in keeping them going. Communities like Denton and Rock Hall and Hampstead and out here in Carroll County. We are working now with the legislature and with a number of public interest groups to try to push to get something comprehensive, and that we can work with local jurisdictions to really meet the kind of growth pressures that this region is already under and is going to be under in the next 20 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm. You're sort of walking a tightrope. I've talked to a number of environmentalists who say the next generation of this movement is going to be weighing the value of the environment versus the value of the individual's right to have control over the land. How do you balance that out? It's the wetlands question.
If we figure that one out, we'd already have the bill passed, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, what's the strategy?
The strategy is to have people understand that if we don't reach some compromise, their value of their land and the value of the quality of life in Maryland, which is fairly high and we hold very strongly here, will diminish rather rapidly. Many of us in the urban areas or the suburban areas are used to things like zoning, and because we realize there's a common good there, that you don't want a hospital being built next door or a garage or something next door to your home. We have to translate that in an equitable manner into the agricultural community, into people who own property who want to develop it, so they can in fact be allowed to farm and get some equity out of their property, but not simply go helter-skelter as we are doing in many, many counties. Many counties are doing a good job, but in many counties we are literally sprawling across the landscape, consuming more and more land. The other is that each of us, the great American dream of an acre, a house, is now 3 acres and a house. And we're just going to have to change our fundamental lifestyle if we're going to be able to save the Bay and fiscally be prudent, because that's just too expensive.
Your role in government is more traditional. You work on legislation and you work on lobbying to get it passed. Tom is in sales, essentially,
yes,
for the Bay. You're the ad man for the Chesapeake Bay. How does that role fit into government? Or tell me a little bit about what your office does.
David talked about the let's take growth management. David talked about the need to develop a new way of thinking about the great American dream. If people don't understand what's at stake, if people don't understand that if we continue to pour fertilizer on your lawn, for instance, without regard to how much runs off, if we people continue to put pesticides on their trees and their greens without understanding that you only need a little bit and the rest of it winds up in the bay and kills something, then all the government programs and all the efforts are going to go for naught. So our job in communicating with the public is to try and teach them about what it is they do every day. Joe talked a little bit about, Joe Mahersky talked a little bit about it, about what people do and their impact on the Bay, and also to sort of educate people. In Europe, land planning and land use is a tradition. It's a very old one. In America, there was always more land over the next river or over the next mountain. You keep going west, and you could have your 40 acres. That's over. It's not like that anymore, and we need to get people to understand that they're going to have to change the way they live if they want to preserve the way they live.
Have you learned lessons in, essentially what you're doing is teaching on a broad scale?
Yes.
And we're talking to people in 46 different locations who are interested in teaching. Do your lessons apply? Is it?
Oh, absolutely. I think the lesson is there's 2 levels of teaching, and Fran Flanagan is a good example of how that applies. There's the one-on-one lesson, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, where they're going out and taking individual students out on the bay, where they're talking to the kids or to adult groups one at a time. There has got to be also a broader way of communicating. If you look at product advertising in this country, they managed to get a point across using medium like television, like we're using here. And I think we have to understand that as much as we teach the one-on-one, that's going to be a very long-term process. You got to wait till the kids grow up and get larger, get bigger. When you're talking adults changing adult behavior, that's really a job for mass communications. You want to call it propaganda, I guess you could. So that's what you really are, as a propagandist for a good cause for the Chesapeake Bay.
Okay. Let me take this opportunity to again remind you that we're going to be here for a few more minutes with this panel. And you can call in at that number again, is 1-800-222-1292 with your questions. And I have a few already. And this one I know goes to you, Tom.
Okay.
It's from Eve Cockrell in Montgomery College, Germantown. What is the money raised by the Chesapeake Bay license tags used for? Tell a story about how that started.
The Chesapeake Bay license plate is a really good example of how, I guess, mass communications can work, and how you can get people, citizenry rally behind a cause. Governor, a couple of years ago, when he first came into office, said it'd be great to raise money for the Bay by selling license tags. And we went to the legislature and worked with them for a number of years so that About a year ago, we had a bill passed that authorized a special commemorative Chesapeake Bay license plate. The money would be dedicated to the bay restoration. Now, there is an organization, a fund in Maryland called the Chesapeake Bay Trust, which is paid for by the state. The state takes its overhead, make sure that the salaries get paid to the 3 or 4 people that work there and their room rent. And the money that they collect from the Chesapeake Bay license plate, which sells for a $20 premium over the regular plates, money that they get from a tax checkoff program in Maryland, goes and is given out in grants to civic organizations, to schools, to colleges, to community groups, to Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, to do hands-on education and bay restoration. So if there's a stream cleanup that needs to get tools and material to do the cleanup, they can apply for a grant. If there's this program was funded through the Chesapeake Bay Trust so that you have a way to communicate with people. So the license plate has been a tremendous success. We originally projected about 100,000 plates would be sold over the course of 2 years, and now we're about 10 months into the program, and we've sold over 300,000 plates and raised over $3 million for the Bay program for hands-on community grassroots restoration. It's probably the only program in the country like this where the money goes directly back out. Every dollar that's raised gets given out again.
Is there money available? We were talking about tight budget times and field trips and working with school groups. Can school groups apply for grants for various?
Absolutely. Okay. It's a great way to get money for the things that you need to do. It will not pay for salaries. It will not generally pay strictly for a bus or transportation down to the Bay, but for in-classroom activities, for field trips, for the materials that teachers need to teach the Bay and teach the environment. The Trust in Maryland is a great place to do it. And I shouldn't say that we're going to try and keep all the money in here. The Trust has given grants in other states in the Bay watershed if they can make a pretty good correlation between the grant and the Bay and Maryland. We're not looking necessarily to expand beyond the watershed, though. Okay. So there's a lot of opportunity there for people to stretch their budget using the money that the citizens of Maryland have said we wanted to go to the Bay.
Okay. A couple other questions. This is from Dr. Gene Sullivan, Montgomery College. And I think this will probably head over your way, David. What do you see as the role of land use restrictions, especially since over 60% of nutrients come from diffused non-point sources?
Well, the point there is that nutrients, which are the prime culprits, if you will, in the Chesapeake Bay, come from a variety of sources, both point source, that's industry and our sewage treatment plants, but a large percentage of them come from what we call non-point source, and that's runoff from farms and from suburban development and growth from existing development. That is why, in fact, we are moving towards growth management program and as well as Virginia, because we need to take some extraordinary measures to hold back those nutrients, and there are a number of techniques for doing that. Both in ground and just the way we develop and grow, like leaving buffers to streams, mandating them, clustering development, rather than everyone spreading out a house on a half acre or an acre, acre and a half, and cutting down every tree in sight to cluster the houses together and use the buffer to help absorb some of those nutrients in the non-point sources. So it's the backbone really of growth management. If we don't adequately address nutrients, especially nitrogen, from non-point source in the next few years, our job of cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay will be extremely difficult.
Tom raises an interesting point. Maryland is not the only Chesapeake Bay state. Right. How do you guys deal with that cooperation between the states?
The key to success in the Bay program, in the Bay cleanup, is something called the Bay program, and that is the formal cooperation between Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and the District of Columbia, and the EPA, which represents all the federal agencies. There is a very structured program with very detailed plans, with objectives. It was kicked off in 1983 when the governors signed an agreement. In 1987, it was reinforced with the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, which had timetables and dates for management plans and for nutrient reductions. The states all work together very closely to make sure that what Pennsylvania does is reflected in what Maryland does, and what is reflected in what Virginia does. So there's a lot of cooperation. Meetings are held probably at any point in any day. There is somewhere a Bay program meeting going on where people are coordinating their activities and working together to make sure we clean it up.
Okay, I'll run through a quick stack of questions here. Question from Ann Bridges, Prince George's Community College in Largo. What kind of impact do the increasing numbers of recreational boats have on the Bay, and is there perhaps a need for restrictions on the size of boats? More laws, guys? More laws?
Hopefully not. There are 160,000 registered boats in the state of Maryland, so we have about the second highest registration in the country. The actual impact of boats on the Bay's environment really is fairly minimal, except in a few isolated locations where boats, like in a marina, will concentrate. We have a number of laws governing how those operate now. It is illegal to discharge directly into the Bay. The state has a pretty innovative program already in place to requiring marinas to put in sewage pump outs and waiving fees for state facilities. So we have to keep vigilant, but the Marine Association and the people who own boats have been very cooperative and are part of the solution.
Okay. Here's a question that I know you have an answer for, and it relates to how a direct law can work on the Bay. Because he lives, this is from Francis Luca, I believe, at Dundalk Community College. Because he lives in an area where there are many recreational boats, he wants to know whether any work has been done on the toxicity of the new anti-fouling paints, which are used on boat hulls.
Right. Well, we've outlawed one called tributyl tin, TBT, except in very limited cases. We're continuing to do research. There's been some substitutes, and we are continuing to do research on the potential toxicity of those materials. So we are watching that very carefully.
Okay. A student named Anne from Germantown, campus of Montgomery Community College. Given budget cuts, how will local county governments be able to fund enforcement of sediment control and recycling programs? And I'll expand that. Any environmental programs.
Because it's a baseline like any other program like economic development or roads. The governor, even with the drastic budget cuts that we've undergone, has kept most of the environmental programs intact in this state. We spend about $120 million a year as compared to 5 years ago. We spent about 55 or 60 million on the Bay programs. It's a challenge, but local jurisdictions, if they're going to want and reflect what I believe their citizens want, the recycling program is a very good example where that is something that has grown from citizens who have demanded that we put recycling programs in place. We're going to also have to understand we're going to have to pay for them. They don't come free, and that's going to have to be in the form of a restructured tax structure, I believe.
Okay. We're expecting to have a waterman with us, but we have a couple of questions relating to oysters and harvest of the Bay. This has been a year when oysters have been talked about an awful lot. We talked about it earlier today, that the figure is tossed around that 99% of the historical oyster population of the Bay is gone. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation early called for a moratorium. It's again in the Baltimore Sun today that the oyster harvest is down. What do you do? Do you put in a moratorium? Do you cut back even more? Can you do anything?
Well, we have cut back substantially. As a matter of fact, our management program for about the past 30 years was fairly successful, starting in the 50s. We hit a fairly even keel of 2 to 3 to 4 million bushels a year. We have been devastated starting about 1985 by disease, and that is probably the major issue. It's one that has wiped oysters out of Delaware Bay and parts of the Chesapeake Bay. A moratorium does not address the disease issue. And I think everyone is trying to find a simple and single answer, a solution that's just a quick and easy fix. The fact of the matter is that there is no single problem, as in many other of the Bay's ills, no single fix with oysters, and we are in fact doing a number of them, working with the watermen. We're starting getting some special money to actually start physically rebuilding reefs, oyster reefs. We've had an oyster shell replenishment program for a number of years, and we're continuing the research to look at the disease issue.
Okay. One quick last softball to your favorite subject.
Go ahead.
Individuals getting involved. That's what you're there for? Can you help the counties? Are you a resource?
Absolutely. We have information, we have programs, we have access to programs, we have grants that through the Chesapeake Bay Trust. I think if you call the CRIS number that Fran talked about earlier, that is plugged into the entire Bay program and can set anyone that's interested in getting involved either individually or with a group or through their school into the right program. CRIS is the place that has all the answers.
Okay. Thank you both very, very much. I know that we'll keep talking to you from time to time. It's not an easy job. Well, we want to say that the set of 80 slides, again, developed during the summer 1991 NSF-supported workshop held at the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory in Solomons, is available on videotape. You've seen some of them during this conference, and some more will be seen during the program's close. A tape of this video conference is also available for $20 from Prince George's Community College. Further information is available from the college at the address on the screen. Now, we'd like to end our program with a poem by Gilbert Byron, who's known as the Thoreau of the Chesapeake, and he died this year, and we'd like to end with this poem. In the calling of the wild duck, in the mating of the kingfisher, in the sloughing of the soft crab, in the softness of the water's touch, in the flight of the great blue heron, in the sculling of the oar, in the belly of the sail, in the hauling of the seine, in the taste of the oyster's raw, in the soaring of fishhawks' wings, in the taste, in the touch of southwest wind, in the little waves that break, in the surge against the prow, in the cliffs of yellow clay, in the quest of quiet harbor, in the Chesapeake.